Welcome back, guys. What we're going to be learning now is about HTML tags and what a tag is. So basically in HTML, you're going to write text in text, but for anything that's not text, you need to use a tag for it. And there's a lot of these. We're going to be covering, I think, all of them. There's probably going to be a few older ones that I'm going to leave out, and that's just because you most likely will never have to use those. And I'll try and mention them as we get to them. The first thing we need to do is erase the text here. When you build an HTML file, tags are contained within pointy brackets like that. So you open it, you type the name of the tag here, and then you close it. Now, we're not going to be writing tag because there is no tag named tag. What we're going to be doing is when we open up an HTML document, you need, oh my God. All right. When you start writing an HTML document, you need to open an HTML tag, so just HTML, that wraps around the entire page. So anything you write in this page is going to go between these two tags. Now, it's also good practice to indent whenever you open a new tag. So there's two top-level tags that we need to use to build a page. And I guess we don't need to, but we're going to. The first one is head. And that's going to close right there. And then body. I'm going to need to configure code completion on this because I don't like how this is working. Now, in the head tag, everything that's in here will not be shown on the web page, but it just tells the browser a little bit more about the page itself. So as you can see up there, that's by default going to show the title of the document or the name of the document or file, which is index.html. But I can go ahead and put a tag in here in the head called title. And then I'm going to just write whatever text I want to appear on the window, title bar, or the tab, depending on what browser you're using. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, and we're going to refresh this, and now as you can see, the title says my title, and it is not printed out in the page. So in the head tag, or in the header of the website, there's a lot of tags that we're going to throw in here that's going to provide information about the web page, and it's going to include resource files. When we get to CSS, you guys will see this. But basically, just remember that the head tag, anything that goes in there is not printed on screen. As opposed to the body tag, every bit of content that you put into a website that's not supposed to go in the header should be within a body tag. And so if I write hello world here and save it, you're going to see that appear on the screen. And so this is the basic structure of a web page. And we're going to get into very basic HTML elements in the next video, in the next few videos actually, and we're going to be learning how to use them properly. And all that is going to be within the body element here. So an element, I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but an element is the opening tag, all of the content within it, and then the closing tag itself. So this is one element, this is one element, this is one element, and then also this is. So that's a little bit about the basics of HTML structure. What we're going to be doing in the next video is, again, getting into some basic tags. Welcome back, guys. So let's get into the actual HTML. We're going to be learning about tags. So again, a tag is like this, and then also the closing version. And the closing tag is just the exact same as the opening tag, but it's preceded by this little /. So just remember that. So we're going to be talking about, I'm just going to make the body of the document a little bigger so that we can actually write in this. And also, in HTML documents, if you skip a bunch of lines and write something here and then here, when you load it in the browser, it's not going to do that. It's going to show them on the same line. So let's write that. And then way down here, let's write world. And I'm going to save it and refresh. And as you can see, it says hello world. If you don't believe me because that's what it said before, maybe it didn't save, I'm going to write hello Nick. And there you go. So there are ways to break lines, and one of the easiest ones, and probably the one you're going to use most, is a div element. So a div element, you open it like that, and you close it like that. And then you can type stuff in here. So let's say, hello, this is a div, and save it. And let's refresh. And you see that that appears in the same way. But now, if I go and put another div element under it, say this is a different div, or div-rent, like what I did there. All right. I just accidentally zoomed in, which is another point. You guys are going to need me to zoom in. What is this? Control Shift equal. I think that's good. Yeah, so basically when I do these courses, I have a 1080p screen, and some of you may not. And so trying to read high resolution text on a lower resolution screen is very painful. So I apologize that I completely forgot that up until now, but now it's bigger. So anyway, when we save this and refresh, you're going to see that it did do a line break. And that's because div elements, by default, are full width, which means if you put another div, it can't go anymore on this line, so it has to appear under it. So that is what a div element is. It's called a block element. So in HTML and CSS, what block element means is that it is however tall it needs to be, or however tall you specify it, and then it's the full width. That's what block means. The opposite of a block element is an inline element. And it is not full width. It is only as tall and as wide as it has to be. And that is called a span element. This is inline. So, yeah. So, if I type, hello, how are, and then drop down a few lines, you. So see what I've done there is I've created two span elements that look, it reads as though it should be only one line. And if I refresh, you will see that it is only one line. And that's because this is one span element. It's only as wide as it needs to be. And then this is the other one. Let me open up Developer Tools. This is something else that you guys are going to have to know. Control Shift I brings up Developer Tools. This is what we need. So let's look at a few things. When I hover over things in Developer Tools here, this kind of highlights the elements on the screen. So as you can see, the body element is full width and full height. And in the bottom left, if you look at the bottom left of my browser, I'm not sure if you can see that, it says the exact width and height in pixels. So that's neat if you need to know that. Now, in Chrome, the element's width and height, the actual size of the element, is shown in blue. Margin, which specifies how much outside room there is to each element, is orange, and then padding is green. We'll get into all that after. That's going to be more into the CSS. You guys will see that before, though. Before that. So let's drop down into the body, and you can expand each tag here within Developer Tools. And what I'm going to do is hover over each of these things and look how it's highlighted. You can see that this now is the full width. Now, there is space to the top and the sides of it, and that's about 10 pixels because the body has a margin of 10 pixels. So this element is contained within this. This cannot be the entire width of the page itself. It can only be the entire width of its parent. So div elements look like this. They are full width of their container parent, and then span elements, in contrast, look like this. They are only as wide as they need to be. And that's why div elements will show on different lines, and span elements will show on the same line unless you tell it not to. And that's also CSS, and we're going to be getting to that as well, but not right now. So, again, Div elements are full width, span elements are only as wide as they need to be. And there are other differences, and we will get to those as well. But for the most part, this is the main difference between the two. And admittedly, these are going to be the two elements that you use most in creating a web page. But we're not going to use them exclusively. There is a name for that. When you open up a website and all you see are div elements, that's called div soup. And that problem has been solved with HTML5 and the introduction of new elements that we can use instead of div elements. And we're going to be discussing a lot of those as well. And I'll point those out as we get to them. So again, just to recap, you build an element by opening and closing it, and then the content that you put within it is part of that element. The entire element is that right. All right. So now what we're going to do is, those are kind of top level elements. We're going to be talking about more inline elements, and it's going to be used to stylize different pieces of text or content. So the first one we're going to be talking about is the I tag. It is literally the letter I, and all it means is if you put a word or even just a character inside of it. So as you can see, this is now an I element, and it wraps around the word div. What's going to happen is the word div on here is going to appear italicized, which means it's kind of slanted to the right. Along the same lines, a B element, we just wrap the word different here, B means bold, and it's going to make the font very heavy. It's going to make it thicker, as you can see. The next element we're going to be using is a P element, and this is a block element, so it's more like a div, and it's kind of a replacement for a div. Let's say you have, the need for a paragraph. And this is a series of words, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just going to copy and paste this a bunch of times so that we can see a really big element and how it wraps. So if I refresh this, you will see that this is now a block element. It is the full width of the page. And then if we copy it, the entire line, I'm going to remove that other span element. And I put that here underneath it, and I'm going to scroll left so you guys can see this a bit better. I'm going to save this. Now we have two paragraphs, and what should happen is they will display with the space of a single line between the two. So that's what a paragraph does. It adds space above and below each P element, which helps it read more like paragraphs. Now, in contrast, if you were to do that with a div, there is no space between, there's no space between, vertically between the div elements, unless you specify it, and we're not into that yet because that is CSS. So those are some inline elements, and there is one more that I want to show you guys, and that is the A element. And what that does is creates a link. So let's save this and refresh. Did I save this? Maybe we actually need to put an href. So a link on its own doesn't do anything. What you need to do is add a property. So far we've learned about elements, and they're very simple. You just open the element, put text or content or an image or whatever within the opening and closing tags. What you can also do is specify properties. And how you do that is within the opening tag here. So I'm going to do it for the A element. You put a space, and then you type the name of the property you want to set. And this can change the appearance or functionality of certain elements. And we'll be visiting this more in the future. What we're going to do is add href, which means hypertext reference. So if this is a link, basically, it needs to point somewhere. After the property name, you put an equal sign and then quotations. There's a bit of code completion. Notice when I open quotations, it closed it for me and put the cursor right in the middle. So what we need to do at this point is tell the A element what it is linking to, so that when someone clicks it, this property is responsible for getting them to that page. So for now, just http google.com. I'm going to save this and refresh, and now you see this looks like a link, and if you click on it, you'll see it takes you to google.com. So you can put any web address here. You can even put no web address. If you just want to have a link that doesn't go anywhere, you can just put a number sign there within the quotations. And that's setting the value of the property href to the dollar or the number sign there. And then if you click it, it doesn't go anywhere, but it does add this to the URL. And we're going to be discussing this more later. That's a more advanced concept, I think. And we're going to be discussing it later. Right now, just know that if you need a URL or if you need a link on a page without actually making it go somewhere, that's how you do it. Or I think you can even do this, and that will just go to itself. So again, in this video, we learned some single character elements, like the I element, which italicizes text, the B element, which makes that text bold, the P element, which is kind of like a div. It's full width. It's a block element, but there's space above and below it. And then we also learned about creating links. And as you guys noticed, I didn't specify, but you guys have noticed, whatever is between the opening and closing tags of the A element is what the link consists of. And this is kind of obvious because every other element follows the same. So yeah, and we also learned about a property, and we're going to be getting more into these later. I first want you guys to be comfortable with everything else I'm teaching you. And if you don't feel like you're getting it yet, don't worry, because we're going to be doing a lot of this. And I'm a firm believer that by doing, you learn. So let's continue. All right, guys, welcome back. What we're going to be covering in this video more is basically just lists. So there's two important elements that are both components of the list. One is the actual list, which is a UL element. And then for each item in the list, there's an LI element. So what I'm going to do is destroy all this stuff. I'm going to leave my two paragraphs there. And I'm going to create an unordered list. That's what UL stands for. And close it right there. And this on its own does nothing. If I refresh this page, you will not see anything from that list. But if we look down here, it is created. This is another block element. Now, we're going to go ahead and create a list item. And we're just going to list off our favorite games. So, Fallout 4. Right now, that's the one I'm playing, actually. I've almost completed it. Witcher. Oh, hold on. That's not a tag. There we go. An LI element. Final Fantasy. And then close that LI. Now we're going to save and refresh. And as you can see, it has created a list. Now, this doesn't really give context to what this list is, so I'm just going to create a div right here and say, my favorite video games. Save it, and refresh, and there we go. Now, alternatively, see, this UL creates the list structure, and then inside of this, the LI elements each have a little dot on the left-hand side. And again, LI means list item, UL means unordered list, but if we wanted to change this to an ordered list, we will save it and refresh, and now we have numbers. Now, yeah, basically that's how you create lists. So just remember that generally the tag that you're creating is somehow corresponding to the actual thing it creates. I'm not sure if div means divider or division. but I'm sure it means something like that. The P element means paragraph. OL is an acronym for ordered list, and UL is unordered list. And you can also change the properties of these. We're not going to be getting into that too much now. We're just covering the list itself and what it does. Now, yeah, so that's really easy, and you can continue listing things. But also, let's go ahead and do this. So we're going to create first an ordered list with the OL tag. So I'm going to refresh there. And then within this last element, let's move this up actually so we can see it between these two. See how it's going to print out. Within this list, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop down at the end of the word there. So we're now using multiple lines to display within the code the list item. And what we're going to do right here, we're going to create an unordered list. And we're going to list our favorite Final Fantasy games. So 7, obviously. And then 15 was pretty good. Short. Very short, but good. And then 9. Well, 8. There we go. So let's save this and refresh. And what you will see is that it's created a sub list. So this, I don't want it to look too confusing to you guys, so what I'm going to do is break it down a bit. Okay, so within this single list item, and when you put your cursor right here, it kind of highlights the closing tag of it. So within a single list item, you put the text of the actual content of that list item, and then you can create a sublist by either using the UL or the OL. And notice that sublists are by nature going to look a bit different if you use the unordered list. And you can also change this to use letters if you want, and we're not going to get to that right now. So, and you can continue if you'd like. You can continue on maybe within 7 here, you might want to list what your favorite characters were from, and then you could continue going. But we're not going to do that. I think this is sufficient for right now. You guys now know how to create lists, and with CSS, we can change these so it's horizontal. We can change this to a drop-down, so when you hover over this, it's going to drop that down, and that can be done in either CSS or JavaScript, and we're going to be discussing both methods once we actually get into that kind of thing. All right, guys, so a few videos ago when we were looking at div elements, I told you that it's really bad practice to use a div just because it's a block element, just because it's full width. It's really bad practice to use that for everything just because, it makes it like that. So what we have in HTML5 is the introduction of new elements, and we're going to be covering those in this video and the next one, and they are block elements that are used to arrange the content in a better way. So let's say I have a header that basically just says the name of the site. So I'm going to create it as a div right here, and I'm going to write my site. Now I need this to look a bit different, so I do have to add some properties to it. So what I'm going to add is a height property, and it's going to be 100. That's 100 pixels high. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to refresh this, and now this is a div at the top of my site that says it's my site. It just shows the title. Maybe I want to show my navigation up there too, links to other pages within the site itself. However, I'm not going to jump into that right now. Instead of using a div element, which does not specify what type of content this tag includes, we're going to use an HTML5 header element. And this is not a header, or this is not a head element. So within an HTML document, the head of the document just provides meta information, but within the body, you can use a header element that's for content. It's just like a div. Except when you're reading through the site, that looks a lot better, and you know exactly what's in it. And it looks the exact same because, again, it is a block element just like a div. It's just a lot better practice to use more appropriate tags where possible. So along the same lines, at the bottom of the site, let's create a div that says copyright 2017. And I'm going to save it and refresh. Now this looks a lot like a footer. And so in that case, instead of doing this right here as a div, we're going to be writing footer. So footer is another HTML5 tag that didn't exist in HTML4, and we're always going to be using this at the bottom of a site if it better describes the content within it than a div does. And so in this case, this is most definitely footer content, so I'm going to wrap it in a footer. And here's a free one for you guys. You can make a copyright symbol in ASCII by using an and sign, and then the word copy, and then a semicolon. So this, we're going to be getting into this as well. These are HTML entities. I believe it's just ASCII characters. It's a way to code in ASCII characters. So if I save this and refresh, it shows a copyright symbol there. And you can also do these with other things, and I can't remember any off the top of my head right now because I don't use them often. But if you need to put more than one space between words, for instance, HTML doesn't like that. It only will recognize the first space character. But if you want more than that, you can use another ASCII character called hold on. What is it? NBSP? I think. Yeah, that is it. Okay. NBSP. So you can, I'm not sure what it stands for. I just know that it does this. So you can copy it and paste it, and now you'll see that we're getting a lot of spaces in between here. It is a space character that makes the HTML recognize it and print it as a space character. So, but more importantly in this video, what we did was we learned about these HTML5 elements, header and footer. Now, if you guys don't have a web development background, these are going to be new to you, and you're not going to maybe see the problem that these solve. But if you have done a little bit of web development in the past, you will know exactly the problem that exists here. And what I'm going to do is actually, I'm going to look at the source of this page right here. And okay, this is a perfect example. So you see all these divs here? If we go down, we see more and more and more. This is div soup, people. When a website is made up mostly of divs where it doesn't have to be, oh, they have a footer. Okay, cool. So they, but then within the footer element, they have a div with a class of footer. So they just kind of, I mean, they could have applied the styles that's applied to this class directly to the footer tag, but they didn't. And up here, they have a top bar. This should be a header element. As you can see it highlighted there, that is most definitely the header of the website. And so this is what div soup is. And with HTML introducing all these other elements that we can use in place of div elements, it makes the document neater and easier to read through. So that's why we're learning these. All right, so along the same lines as the previous video, where we learned about elements that we can use instead of divs, I'm going to destroy all the content within here. And right up front, we're going to be learning about a line break. So I'm going to save this so you guys can see how it looks now. See, this is shown right there, and that's shown right there. We want space between them, so go ahead and create an element. Now you would think this BR, or break element, needs to be written like this, but it doesn't. So there are such things as self-closing elements within HTML. This is wrong, by the way. This is right. So if you're creating an element that doesn't have any inner content, so inner content is the stuff between tags, if it doesn't have any of that, you can create certain elements like this. An image tag is another perfect example, and we're going to be learning about that as well. So I'm going to copy this a few times. And this is generally bad practice, but we haven't got into CSS yet, so this is the only way that we can reliably break lines as we need them. And as you can see, it's now put in all these single lines between the content. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create some div soup with an A element here. And for all intents and purposes, let's just imagine that it links to somewhere real. And then we need well, we can just use a paragraph. So this is a sample text for the article that you will be reading in a moment. Let's close that P element there. So I'm going to save this and refresh. And cool, so we do see that. Now, this works. If this is what the page was, this would work. However, we can use HTML5. I'm going to show you guys. Okay, so I got a bunch of those, and they're all in a div, and it looks messy. But on the front, it looks exactly how we want it to. Let's say this was a news website, and each one of these is a different article, or links to a different article. Why use div elements then when we can actually use the HTML5 article element? And if you save it and refresh it, it looks the exact same. The only difference is now, without even reading any of the internal content of this tag, we know that it specifically contains an article. So I'm going to go ahead and delete all these div elements. I'm going to copy this. And now look, that looks a bit messy, but we know, just by looking at it, we don't even have to read it. We know that each of these contains an article. And I'm going to refresh, and as you can see, it doesn't look any different because it does the exact same thing, except in here now, it looks a little better. Because we see a header, we see articles, and we actually don't have to use any divs in here. But let's go ahead and add one. So this is going to be called main. I'm going to drop down right to the end, and I'm going to close it. Now if I save it and refresh, within the page you will notice that it looks even better now. There's a header, there's a main content area, and then there's a footer. And inside the main content area, there's a series of articles which contain links and paragraphs. So this structure, using these tags, does appropriately convey what's within those tags. We know that this is obviously the main content. Without even highlighting it and seeing what it contains, we know just by reading the tag name that main must be the main content of that page. And we also have sections. So I'm going to indent these articles actually. There we go. So let's say we have multiple sections. We want to have a section with all the articles in it, and then we want to have a section called like About Me. Maybe it has some information about the site, and then a section for contact forms. So what we can do is use the section. Did I just turn on? Okay. So section is another HTML5 element that we can use to avoid using divs. And I'm going to go ahead and create a section here and make it say About Me. Some content would normally go here. And then another section. And we haven't learned about creating forms yet, so I'm not going to actually put a form in there. But just imagine that this is a great big block of text, maybe an image, but it is its own section. We can logically, when we think about this page, we can logically section it up into a contact section, an About Me section, and an article section. So I'm going to refresh. And now if you look through the code on the right here, we see, okay, we don't need to expand this because we know what's in here. We know that there's a title element, maybe there's some meta tags, maybe there's included resource like a style sheet. We don't need to look at any of that if we don't need to look at it. Within the body, we know what's in there, all the content of the page. We know the header. Okay, let's say we're trying to locate an article's link, maybe just to see what it links to. Which, I mean, you can totally hover over there and see what it links to, but we're looking through for something specific. So we're going to go into main because it makes sense that everything's in main. We're going to open up a section, And we see articles in here. So we know that it's one of these. And we know that the link is right there. So with sections, you can kind of section off your content logically, and it allows you to, again, keep things clean. And that's a big, big part of web development. I want you guys to really pay attention to the code that you're writing. If it doesn't indent properly, fix it. For instance, if this indented like that, I would not leave it like that. And maybe I'm OCD about this, I'm not sure, but it should look clean and balanced. Everything should be in the correct spot. And indentation matters very much. If the indentation is off, it's not going to break the page or anything, but it's going to make it really difficult when you come back to it to expand on your work and add things to it. You can tell about how far in the content is. If it's indented way over here, you know it's in about, 10 different elements. It has about 10 different parents. So that's why that's important as well. So for right now, those are all the HTML5 elements that we're going to talk, that were introduced with HTML5 specifically to resolve div soup. So remember, if there's one of these elements that makes more sense to use than a div, use it, please.